Parents who feel annoyed or angry at kids who have needs can do a lot of damage. And if this happened to you growing up, you might find yourself today surrounded by people who you can't have needs around. And you listen to them and support them, but when it's their turn to do that for you, you're magically not there. And they either don't care when you're having a hard time or they literally can't tolerate it. It's not reciprocal. And you might think that all people are like that, but they're really not. It's that whether you know it or not, you're picking people who are like that, and you're participating in that dynamic with them without even knowing it, probably because you have a blind spot. So my letter today is from a woman I'll call Jean, and she writes, "Dear Anna, I have recently subscribed to your channel and have been watching one of your videos where you describe abandonment melange. I'm definitely experiencing this feeling right now after something which happened to me yesterday. Abandonment melange is a phenomenon named by Pete Walker that people who are abandoned as kids sometimes get that feels like a very intense mix of rage, grief, and panic when your abandonment trigger gets set off. And it's more intense maybe than non-traumatized people, and you kind of know it. Maybe if you get it, you know what I'm talking about, and you've kind of known for a long time that you take it harder than other people when somebody leaves you, or even when you fear they're going to leave you. Actually, you can get abandonment melange just from thinking that you want to leave. So that's what this is about. All right, so Jean says, I know the feeling is probably too intense for what the situation warrants, but I feel lost and confused because every time I feel I've established a solid connection or friendship with someone, it seems to blow up and evaporate the moment I express having any struggles, problems, or needs of my own. I've got my fairy pencil here. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to. I'm going to read through Jean's letter so we can just hear what the story is here, and then I'll go back and talk about things I circled. All right, I've been happily married, she says, for the past 15 years. Before meeting my husband, all my romantic relationships were either short-lived or, quote, casual. I'm guilty of having been the cool girl in my friendships, too, always having a tendency to put the needs of my friends before my own, then being punished or abandoned by these people when I dared to express any issues of my own. As a result, I tended not to suppress this side of myself and just basically crap-fitted, telling myself this was the price I had to pay to have friends and to be accepted in a social setting. Crap-fitting, that's a word that I made up for when we fit ourselves to crap. We get very good at it as kids to just, however unacceptably we're being treated or the situation's bad, we fit ourselves to it. You can lose a lot of years of your life crap fitting instead of having something that's happy for you. Okay. So Jean goes on. I grew up with parents who were emotionally immature and would often tell me that I was too much. Have you been told that? I really resonated with that, Jean. Instead of instilling discipline or setting boundaries appropriate to raising children, they would verbally lash out at me whenever I crossed the line. Fast forward to the present. Nearly a year ago, my husband developed a sudden, rapidly developing illness, and we decided to move cities to get better access to medical treatment. Shortly before this, I met a good-looking gay guy at my gym who seemed incredibly cool and funny, but also open to discussing his vulnerabilities. We hung out a couple of times and talked about a lot of things, and I felt like I had found that special connection. He expressed dismay that I was moving away. However, we kept in touch, mostly through messaging. The communication gradually dropped off as the months went on, but I just put this down to having separate and busy lives. Yesterday, this guy posted a meme on social media about dealing with personal struggles, and it resonated with me so much that I messaged him to tell him this. He replied that he's going through some heavy stuff at the moment and lamented the general lack of support from people around him. I told him I will be in town next week for work, and he replied that he would love to catch up with me, and then I did it. I sent 2 further messages briefly telling him about the struggles around my husband's illness, the treatment, and people's lack of understanding about the condition, kind of reflecting the sentiment that he had expressed. He stopped replying and left these messages unread. Following the advice of my late grandmother, I never write anything to anybody that I would not feel comfortable seeing printed in the newspaper. Hence, I'm confident I didn't write anything bad or crazy to this guy. Nonetheless, I feel embarrassed and downright crushed by the cessation of communication. Truthfully, I was so distraught yesterday I had to take medication. This kind of thing happens to me so much, and I cannot understand why. People who are all over me one moment ghost me in the moment I basically tell them my life is not perfect. I become highly triggered, especially when I express vulnerability to someone and it's not acknowledged. Recently, I opened up to my mother about overcoming my mental health struggles. She immediately responded by asking, had I heard from my sister? A further reaffirmation, says Jean, from my childhood, that I'm just not important enough to care about. Only after yesterday's episode did it hit me that this guy, who I had thought of as a friend, never once asked me about my husband's condition the whole time I've moved away, despite being aware of the situation. We chatted and messaged about other stuff, but it was always very lighthearted and harmless, like movies and music or his problems at work. Just realized he never asked me about my work either. I saw a therapist a couple years back who picked up on my hiding my own needs and problems so as not to appear off-putting to others. She made me realize that a healthy friendship entails a two-way exchange where both parties are allowed to have less than perfect lives. My question to you is, how do I go about cultivating healthy friendship dynamics where this kind of exchange is welcome and support is given as well as received? I'm scared that if anything happens to my husband, my life is going to be horrible if I keep attracting these types of friendship dynamics. Many thanks. All right, Jean, I think I can help you. So let's go through what you told me. So you get abandonment, Melange. You feel abandoned by this frequent, or I don't know how frequent it is, but it's happened again and again, where you have a friend and they just ghost you. And it always seems to happen when you express having any struggles, problems, or needs of your own. I know what you're talking about. I do know people where I've had that dynamic with, and it used to puzzle me too. You say, I've been happily married for the past 15 years. Before meeting my husband, relationships were short-lived or casual. So I don't know what it means that you had that kind of relationship, whether it was youth or another manifestation of this type of person who you end up being friends with. But you have a happy marriage now, so let's just call those past relationships water under the bridge. And you used to be the cool girl, and you do it with friends too. Cool girl is, she's like, hey, I'm cool, I don't need anything. And it's usually used in a context of a sexual relationship where the man doesn't want anything serious, just wants sex whenever he wants it. And cool girl is like, that's cool, but might be just dying inside, thinking she has to act cool. So we're not into being cool girl here. Tendency to put the needs of your friends before your own, and then you get, quote, you say punished or abandoned when you dare to express any issues of your own. So you keep having that experience. It's funny how whatever's in here will just keep being your experience out there, right? So your parents were emotionally immature. That's an interesting choice of words, and would often tell you that you were too much. Oh my gosh, I have been told I'm too much too, and I'm just the right amount. I just wasn't in the right place in my life yet. For me to stand here right now in my studio making a video, talking to nobody but a camera, you have to be kind of big. You have to have a lot of, going on here. And so this part of my personality, when I'm at the dinner table or meeting somebody new, I have to turn it way down because it's totally bowls people over. It's too much. So context, right? But we have a personality that we were born with, and all of our healing is about becoming our real selves, learning where our mistakes, our tendency to make mistakes, where that needs to be adjusted so that us being fully ourselves is also kind and considerate and reciprocal and all that good stuff. So you're on the way here. They wouldn't set boundaries or set discipline. They would just lash out. So this is interesting too. You kind of see that where you don't realize that you're crossing some line with friends. It's just, except you say something and then they're out. And you're confused about that. They just stop calling you. Somehow you were too much. So that's definitely the theme you're communicating to me. You're baffled. Why do I seem like too much? I was so careful to contain my personality. All right. So fast forward to the present. Your husband's having a serious health thing. Wow, that must be incredibly hard. Of course you need friends. And then you move to this other city to get the better medical treatment, and now you're alone. And you try to maintain a friendship by chatting with the gay guy at the gym, and he was funny and cool, and he talked about his vulnerabilities. Okay, so there are his virtues. He's funny, he's cool, he talks about his vulnerabilities. What he doesn't seem to be good at is caring about you even enough to ask how your husband is doing. I know such people. There are many of them. Not most people are like that, but it's self-centered. It's also emotionally immature. And some people, it's enough that they are fun friends that you hang out and do something fun and you don't talk about your problems. Like that can be a perfectly fine kind of relationship to have. But you're going to the hardware store for milk here. You're going to this person who really, he says right out, I'm going through heavy stuff. I can't care about you right now. And then he doesn't call you if you say that you're having a heavy thing, and you are having a heavy thing. And somebody has to be mature, in a good place, and receptive to being supportive of somebody who's going through something like that, because it kind of outdoes whatever he's going through. I don't know, but yours is pretty big. And so maybe he's a narcissistic type where his problems always have to be the biggest, or maybe he's just going through heavy stuff right now and he can't deal with somebody whose partner is very sick and who's having crisis. It's okay that he feels that way, but it's not the friend that you need and are looking for. That's all. So we can just, we can take off any villainizing of him or these other friends. They're not villains. They're just not the right one. And so you stayed in touch and you're blaming yourself. You're like, and then I did it. I sent 2 text messages telling him about struggles around your husband's illness. Because, and I'm going to say this is probably your CPTSD, if you didn't have the trauma when you were a kid and you had been totally emotionally raised by good, sane parents, you would be able to read the room. And, you'd be able to tell, you would have noticed a long time ago that he sort of fades out when you talk about yourself. He doesn't want to talk about you. He wants to talk about him. He's happy to have you around. If you talk about him, he doesn't want to carry any water for you. That's all. I don't think it's great, but I do like to emphasize that blaming other people is not really productive. So, all the focus is okay, what can you do? What have you done? What can you do? Because that's where your power to change the situation is. So you told him about what you're going through, and it was very similar to what he had said. And then he just stopped even accepting your messages. I believe you. You didn't say anything bad or crazy. Some relationships are the kind where you can talk about this stuff. I've talked in some of my earlier videos. I had a period between 2004 and 2008 when I was in and out of the hospital for 14 surgeries. I was a single mom. The whole situation was throwing my life into chaos, financially, emotionally, socially. And it was shocking how few of my friends would actually show up and help me. There were a few people who came to the hospital once, but mind you, I was there 14 times for probably a cumulative 4 months or something. So, a few one-time visits were not enough. And I had whole weeks without visitors. And I was surprised because I used to give a lot more energy than that to other people. And some of the ones, I was a 12-step sponsor, and yeah, it's a lot of time that you share with another person. It's not a commodity exchange. You're not giving time in demand for something back. But I was just disappointed. I was sponsoring 12 people, and only a few of them ever showed up to, help me out. I needed housework. I needed my kids driven around. I needed food. Sometimes I was doing better, but when I was first out of the hospital or needed a ride home, I just was like a pile of needs. And I had such a hard time asking for it because I guess I knew on some level that they were going to let me down. And then a few people show up, and not only do they not let you down, but they amaze you. And so I think sometimes when we're suffering and what you're going through and what I'm going through, one silver lining is that it forces you to have to reach out for help. And if you're like me, you don't do that very much. And so you don't have the fruit of finding the people who are actually there for you. And so it's never enough, though. I have this documented in some of my other videos and courses, but there were times when I just didn't have anybody and I was in such grief about it. I couldn't get better from all this surgery. It kept falling apart because I couldn't rest, and I was lifting my little kids, and I was so sad, and I was like, why is my life so hard and other people aren't? And a mentor said to me, because you don't have a mom, you don't have a sister, you don't have a best friend, and you don't have a partner. And I was like, there's the math, right? So your husband's in need right now. You don't have enough support for dealing with that. So that's an important problem for you to tend to, but you need the right people. You need the right people, and sometimes it takes time to cultivate those relationships. But it can feel less like despair when you're on the path, when you're working on cultivating those relationships. And by writing this letter and sort of inviting some insight about it, you are taking a huge step toward opening your mind and your healing process. So you're good. Things are going to happen. Things are going to happen because you've done that. So you said, I get highly triggered when I express vulnerability to someone and it's not acknowledged. So one thing about that, just to see, can we scan the horizon for anything you might be doing to make it worse? When we have a trigger, it's understandable that you have a trigger about that, but it could be kind of uncomfortable for people. Your energy gets weird. There's anger where it's kind of puzzling to people. So that might be something, is that when you express vulnerability or say something, you might already have a little bit of tone that's kind of putting people on notice, just possibly. I'm not accusing you, just like ask yourself, is that it? And you might not be able to stop doing that right now because you still have a trigger, but that's what my program is all about. You learn to calm these triggers, and then they come out just neutral, and they don't have that charge that feels like an accusation. Because two people, they have a nervous system, you have a nervous system, and no matter how much you're acting like the cool girl and being like, no, it's fine that I pay attention to all your problems and needs and you run away, it's cool, right? If you do that. But your energy can't lie, they can feel you. They can feel you, and they can feel that you're angry and that you need something from them. And sometimes, being that you didn't get your needs met as a kid, that need can be a little outsized. So again, I don't know if that's true for you, but it's something to ask yourself. It's a way that people with CPTSD can kind of be part of this dance of getting treated this way, okay? Recently, you opened up to your mother about overcoming your mental health struggles. Okay, I understand the impulse, but I just want to say, you get what you pay for, right? If your mom is the person who treated you that way, chances are high she cannot hear this. And that's just been a lot of our experience. She can't hear it. But you tried. It's worth a try. It's worth a try, but if I had been there at your side while you did that, I would have said, prepare yourself. It's probably not going to go well. And if it doesn't, just don't even worry. All you're doing is running an experiment. Like, is today a day when she can maybe hear it? No, still no. Okay, cool. You don't have to be cool, girl, but you just have to be realistic sometimes. Like, mothers are supposed to care, but she can't. And it's sad. But she can't. So again, it's going to the hardware store for milk. But this was interesting what you said. When you said, hey, I overcame my mental health struggles, she immediately started asking if you had heard from your sister. She dodged that one. Hearing about your mental health, that you ever had mental health struggles, probably reminds her, at least on an unconscious level, that she didn't treat you well as a kid. And it's not surprising that you would have struggles. Oh, hey, change the subject. How's your sister? So that doesn't surprise me, but I know what it's like. And it's just like such a colossal and obvious dodge of you opening your heart. And I'm sorry, That does feel bad, but it's time to adjust your expectations. You have such a mother. And so here's what's interesting. You said she did that, and you put in boldface, a further reaffirmation from my childhood that I am just not important enough to care about. All right, I'm going to stop you right there. No, that's not what it is. I think you're telling me what your fear is. Fear, it just goes to show I'm not important. And I hear that that's how your emotional being hears it. But no, it's a reaffirmation that she is emotionally damaged and not able to pay attention to another person's needs and needed to change the subject, either on purpose or unconsciously, or basically is just so freaking out of it that she doesn't even know that you're not supposed to do that, that's rude. Yeah, you have a mother who's incompetent at hearing sensitive things and responding appropriately. In the end, that's what it is. So it reaffirms nothing about you. It says nothing about you. There's nothing wrong with you for having this wound from how you were treated. That's to be expected. It's normal. And you're actually, you're working on it. So you're fine. There's no reaffirmation that you're not important enough to care about. You're totally important and you need to be cared about. You have a husband now, so That's somebody who cares about you. Your mom probably is never going to care for you more than she does right now. And it'll be superficial. She can't hear you. I don't know anything about her, but I just know she couldn't respond to you in that moment. And it was really, sounds like it's never really better than that. So a therapist validated for you. Yeah, this is, you hide your own needs and problems to not be off-putting. So you really seem to have internalized this idea that you're too much. And if you did, you're so much like me and so many women that I'm close to, where we're just like, yes, we're too much. And what is too much? We're very vibrant emotionally, often intellectually. We have a lot to say. Like, I'm not always received well when I have opinions or when I have a lot of exuberance or enthusiasm. It feels like a lot to people. I'm at a point where my emotional needs are basically met by me, and I have a husband, and I have sons who are caring. I'm reasonably cared for enough that anybody else, if they're uncaring towards me, it doesn't destroy me. I think it's rude. I might not like them. It hurts my feelings, but it doesn't destroy me anymore. I have a defense there. And I know a lot of people are listening and they just don't have that person who gives them a little buffer, who cares about them even when other people don't. And so all of us, that's our job, is to learn to connect enough to have people who do care. And should we need help, they will be there for us. And part of how we do that is by being there for them. And it's a tricky dance, isn't it? Because you don't want to be a doormat. You've been sitting there listening to like this gym guy's problems all this time. So here's another thing just to ask yourself. I don't know that this is what you did, but this is one thing that a person sometimes does, which is when you tend to take care of other people's needs and they don't reciprocate, it can be this kind of negative, toxic pattern of trying to do a trade with them that they never consented to. You're just like, hey, I'm cool, girl. I'm your friend. We're just friends. Oh, that's so sad that you have that problem. And then you demonstrate all this empathy for them. But on some level, you're trying to make a trade with them. Like, I'll tell you what, I'll go over the top and care for you. Will you do it for me? But it's not spoken. And you only hung out with them a couple times. So, it's like, this is a little bit like dating. Like 2 dates, you don't really get to have big expectations of somebody. All that is a way to get to know somebody. And some people do like open up intimacy, friendship, closeness with others by talking about their problems, right? So this guy did that. But that was, it just wasn't what you hoped. So I would say women, friends, people who have some similarity to you, like it's okay to have a male friend, and a gay male friend is safe for your marriage and everything. But women, it's really important to be friends with women, especially when you had a crap mom. And I speak from experience. I had a long time when it was hard for me to do that. And it's so much better now. And there's an important thing that, people who are similar, they can give each other, they can have that understanding together. So that said, everybody's got to find friendship where they can. Everybody's a little unique. Not everybody fits the mold. I used to think it was, I'm just not like woman-like, and I fit in better with guys. But I think a lot of that was CPTSD. It was CPTSD making it very triggering for me to be around women, and especially the way they have ease around each other. It's hard. Then I'm like, why do they have ease? I don't know what to say. I don't know the right thing to say. And the less fear and resentment I have, I use this technique, the daily practice. I teach it in a free course. It's always down below in the description section. It's on my website, Crappy Childhood Fairy, free course. You take that free course and I will send an email to you inviting you with a welcome. You get a welcome email and it says, do you want to join me in my free calls? And I do the calls twice a month. And people come on live and ask me questions. We use the techniques and then I take questions. But using that technique, the reason I devote so much time to sharing that with the world is because it saved my life. And it helped me just move a lot of just fearful, resentful thoughts. I don't know where they go. I don't know how they connect. I don't know what causes what. I don't have to know. I just have to get them on paper and out, ask for them to be removed, rest in meditation. And I just find that my mind has room for new things, new development, new feelings, new relationships. I'm not so in the grip of things that have hurt me in the past. And you know how they do that? They just sort of like ride on top of your head, and squish you down. And it's all you can, it attracts your focus. And every time your feelings get hurt, you're like, see, that thing. And I hear that going on for you. It's normal. But the more you get free of that, the more you can begin to have a new experience. And isn't that what we all want? We want newness. We want the opportunity to have a life defined by who we really are and not by what they did to us. So what do we do about this? So how can you change the pattern? Jean, this is what I want to suggest to you. Think of these friendships a little like dating, where you're not going to just rush in and be best friends and tell each other your problems. Your problems are not the main thing about you, even though right now it is kind of the main thing about you that you're going through this crisis with your husband. But you are a whole person with a whole life and a whole story and a whole set of ears and a whole heart to share. And so gradually, I'm going to say like 6 times hang out with somebody before you get into problems of your own, right? Just 6 times to hang out, have light conversations, ask questions, tell things about yourself, but not the heavy stuff yet. All right. That's the secret, is just to allow a friendship to sort of take root, get a feel for it. Sometimes you hang out 3 times and you just realize, we don't have anything in common. Or you hang out for a few times and you're just like, I don't like this person. I don't like what they just did, how they treated the waiter or whatever it was. And so you're going just a little at a time. Think of it like an egg carton, put 1 egg in at a time, 1 egg in at a time. You don't just take the whole thing and go. So just gradually test the relationship and see. And you can begin to introduce things that are on your mind, not crises yet, but just kind of be very conscious and just see how they respond to that. And don't go in and caretake them emotionally around the problems they say. You can nod. Honestly, when I talk about my problems, I find it very hard when people get in there and try to fix it for me and go, oh my God, that's so hard. Because what you're saying is, and they try to reframe it. And I know they're just being kind, but I don't like having my stuff reframed. Mostly I like, if I tell a friend I'm having a hard time with this, I cut my teeth emotionally in Al-Anon. Years, and there's a custom there that you just let people say what they're saying. You don't comment on it. You don't go pat them on the back or anything. You just let people say what they're saying, even when they're sad. After the meeting, you can go up and go, oh, I heard what you said, and that sounds really hard, and here's my number. You can do that, but you don't do it in the middle of people talking. And at first it felt very weird to me, but you actually can just let people talk and give them your full attention and show them with your face that you care. You don't have to rush in and fix it. And definitely you want to stay away from trying to create any sort of tit for tat. Like, I tell you what, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of like empathy, but you owe me. Really just get to know somebody and see what they're like, and see if they really are somebody that you want to share things with, or that you want to give a whole bunch of emotional energy to. Now, because you have this kind of like trauma imprint where, and I think you had said, that you attract this kind of person. Did you say that? I don't know. You may not have, but that's often our perception. We just go, I don't know where these people find me, but they do. They're actually, there's a whole mix of people around you, just like everybody. It's not magic. It's who you resonate with. You're used to it from your mom. You have the capacity to pay attention to people who are self-centered. And they love that, believe me, because they're so self-centered, like they can't get everybody to do that. So when they find somebody like you, they're not being devious. They're not intentionally hurting you, but they're just like, they love to have people dote on their problems, and they're not interested in giving it back. That's how they roll. You will crap fit to that. So there you are. Now you have a friendship with a person like that. Somebody who didn't have your trauma would probably just be like, oh, hi, gym guy, and then not have a friendship, because they would sense the shallowness of somebody who talks about themselves but shows no curiosity and does not even respond when you say, well, I'm moving away because my husband has a serious medical thing. Like any friend who is emotionally intact is going to go, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is he going to be okay? Where are you going to live? Like any friends would do that. The guy at the gym, you'd only hung out a couple times. So it's not even really on him to be that. He hasn't let you down. He's just revealing who he is and what he's interested in right now. And it's not what you hoped. So he's off the hook. You're off the hook. And now you get to practice through getting to know people in your new city by, one little hangout at a time, one conversation at a time. hold back on the heavy stories. If they're throwing heavy stories out there at you, you can say things affirmative like, oh yeah, that must be hard. I have experienced stuff like that. But don't go into it yet. You're gonna be measured in your approach to sharing yourself and see what happens. Often by the time you've hung out 6 times, you're gonna have a feel for this kind of thing. You'll have a feel for whether they are a reciprocal person. You can absolutely shift your pattern and change this, but it's just time to bring your awareness into it and just keep paying attention to the interactions. And for this, it helps if the first ones are not super long, like not a big day outing or something, a cup of coffee, a little walk, a short thing so that you have a conversation. And it's okay that some friends are not for our deep stuff. They're just people we take walks with. That's okay. You can do that. I think you're going to do well, though. I think you're going to recover because where your attention is right now is right where it needs to be to start opening your mind. I like what you're doing. If you were abused or neglected in childhood, I can almost guarantee you've had more than your share of ruined friendships. That's what complex PTSD does. At its heart, it's an injury to your ability to connect with other people. You've probably been aware a long time that connection is hard for you. And this is a terrible way to go through your life. You're robbed of the most important things that make life happy: love, belonging, a tribe. And here's the thing. If the connection wound is there, it doesn't tend to get better by itself. It needs to be healed. And I'm calling you out that if friendships are not working out for you, now is the time to change that. I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I teach people how to heal from the symptoms of PTSD from childhood by learning to calm triggers and healing that connection wound so that you can become fully yourself and stop ruining perfectly good friendships. I'm going to talk about what these symptoms look like and how you can heal them. So let's start with the first and most obvious one, and that is lashing out. The most destructive symptom of unhealed trauma is the way negative emotions, which are normal, get oversized in our minds and come bursting out of us without a filter. How many times have you expressed yourself and then within a minute or two had that strange feeling that maybe your anger came out a little too strong? It's the worst feeling. And part of this behavior could be what you learned at home from parents who raged, right? But a lot of it probably has to do with how your brain and nervous system handle stress and negative experiences, even little ones. When you feel criticized or judged or treated unfairly or left out, there can be this burst of brain activity. There are studies where they've measured this reaction in people who had intensely stressful childhoods. And when something negative happens now, what you'll see on a brain scan is on the right front cortex where emotions happen, it's like boom, off the charts activity. And at the same time, this dampening of the left front cortex where reasoning is supposed to be happening. That is what it feels like, right? Not so much reasoning, a lot of emotion. Now, people who don't have that trauma injury going on would probably have a little on both sides, some emotion, some reasoning, and they'd be thinking to themselves, I should put this in perspective. I should ask some questions and pause a little, find out why this is happening and see if I can mitigate it. Now, remember how normal people do that because this is your workaround too. You can teach yourself to do that process and override the CPTSD response. You get hurt by something a friend says, it's like a 5-alarm fire over here. You're like, whoa, it's a big surge of emotion. And your instinct is to fight it, to make it stop, because it feels like all that emotion is being caused by the other person. But actually, your reaction, which is generated in here, is exaggerating the reality. Sure, people do and say hurtful things, but with CPTSD, something this big feels this big. And you're getting all these body signals, adrenaline, cortisol, a feeling of being gut punched, or even panicky. And you're either going to go into fight, flight, fawn, or freeze mode. And when you lash out, that's fight mode. We all know how it feels to be on the receiving end of somebody doing that. It hurts. It feels unreasonable and crazy making, and you want to protect yourself. So when you react with that fight mode, you'll get a lot of people pulling away from you. And in a moment, I'll teach you how to prevent that. Okay, sometimes it's not overt anger that you're expressing. It's a negative emotion. It's usually anger or a feeling of being threatened, but you're dressing it up as concern, as in, I'm only saying this because I care about you, or I'm just speaking my truth, right? Have you done this? You say things that you think are just true or caring or clarifying statements, But your words are loaded. They're full of little prickles. And it's because even though CPTSD stops you from seeing this in the moment, your words are full of hurt. And it's hurt directed at the other person. And what is it? It's the same criticism, judgment, feeling of unfairness that sets off your triggers. So before you even know what you're doing, your brain is like, you hurt me, I'll hurt you right back. And your CPTSD brain thinks it's protected you, but it's totally messing everything up. You actually need friends, and CPTSD is sabotaging that. Another way negative emotions come in and wreck your friendships is you abandon people. This is that same thing where your CPTSD brain is trying to protect you, and this time by shutting people out, not speaking, not responding to them, giving them the cold shoulder, all because the reaction in here is more than you can handle. And it feels like they did it to you. And maybe partly they did, but CPTSD is characterized by that intense emotional reaction to things that's out of proportion to what's going on. And I know a bunch of you are going to say, but so-and-so is a narcissist and they were abusive to me. But I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about friendships, people that you want in your life. So if you're feeling a little too much emptiness where your friends are supposed to be, this could be one of the reasons, right? All right, sometimes your anger or defensiveness isn't directed at the person in front of you, it's directed at someone else, and you're having a lot of drama about it. And if your CPTSD isn't healed yet, you can be a bit helpless in keeping drama out of your life or staying calm about just regular ups and downs that are in all lives. So having been there, I'd say having drama feels a lot like living in a house where there are no doors and windows, and all this cold air and wind is always getting in. And there's strangers sleeping on the couch, and there's whole rooms piled up with problems. And when that's happening, you can hardly think of anything else. It's all you can talk about. There's no doors. I'm freezing. There's somebody on the sofa. And we all know what it feels like to be around someone who's overwhelmed by their own drama. You can't help them. You can't reach them. And they're usually way too loaded up with their own stuff to care about you or anybody. The thing to remember is that drama is a natural byproduct when a person is out there living life, which is good. But thanks to being raised maybe in a dysfunctional family, maybe not having such good red flag detector skills, drama gets in. So when you're going through drama, how are you going to not talk about it or have bad days? It happens. And this can be healed. But just for the record, some of the people who have left your life, even though you wanted them to stay, maybe left because there was too much drama. The people who might stick around when drama's running high in your life are usually other traumatized people who are maybe attracted to drama or have so much of their own, they're not worried about what's going on with you. Either way, it's not a good dynamic. Okay, here's a different kind of symptom that pushes friends away, and it's when you have too many rules for other people about what they can and can't say and do when they're around you. Now, there is such a thing as boundaries, like please don't give alcohol to my teenager, or don't touch this wound on my leg. Those are boundaries. But if you're someone who gets triggered easily into CPTSD symptoms, and I don't think you'd be watching this if you were not, it would be better if you could stay untriggered, because in that regulated state of being untriggered, you can have your boundaries and allow other people to be their wonderful selves. That's what everybody wants, including you. So what can you do to contain your CPTSD symptoms while your healing is still in progress and still open up your life to better and better friendships? The first and best thing you can do is to learn to calm your triggers from inside rather than trying to make other people protect you from getting triggered. It's not your fault that you have CPTSD, but it's not their fault either. The power to change things is actually here in your own brain and emotions and thinking. This is the only place where change is possible, even if it's not instant or easy. You absolutely have the power in any moment, any interaction, to pause and soften down and listen and be attentive to what's going on so that your negative emotions can kind of go over here and your friends' feelings can be safe over here. If there's something you need to communicate or express anger about or set a boundary around, it can usually wait a minute or two. And that little cushion of time between trigger and reaction is your friend. Doing this also helps to keep your focus on the values and behaviors that you're trying to hold for yourself or grow into. Now, maybe it's kindness, maybe it's a more accepting attitude, maybe it's encouragement for other people. And that little bit of time can also allow you to realize that you want to step away. Like when other people badmouth others or rant as a way to just be social. Not participating in that is a value too. And no, you don't have to criticize them or judge them on the way out the door. They get to be them. You get to be you, even if being you means not having them in your life. Now, having CPTSD can mean that on some days or for an hour here and there, you might get very stuck in your negative emotions and thinking. It happens all the time. There's a time to talk with friends about it, but there's a way that the intensity of CPTSD can make you talk a little too much about it, too intensely. Good friends need your time and attention too, so force yourself, if you have to give them the floor sometimes, maybe half the time. What you can do with those negative emotions is funnel them out of your mind and onto paper. And I don't mean journaling, which maybe that's been helpful to you in the past, but the techniques that I used and how I recovered from CPTSD are different. And I teach them in a free course where you can learn the writing and the meditation technique that go together to clear that negativity out so that you can be more yourself. As always, I put a link to that below in the description section. I think it's under every video I ever make. When you do have criticisms of other people, you don't have to speak all of them, and you don't have to flee either. You can ask yourself, when you have the urge to criticize, is it really necessary? Usually it's not. You don't have to say, I'm not going to your fundraiser because I think the organization is stupid and I don't like the people there. It might be true, but you can just say, oh, thank you for the invitation. I'm not able to come to that, but good luck with that. You can actually do that. When you have hurt someone, which is going to happen, just be quick to see it. Admit it. Do something about it. Don't wait. Don't make excuses. Don't tell your friend all the reasons why you couldn't help but be hurtful, whatever, because of your past, because of the problems you're having. Just open your heart to them and own it and apologize. And I'll put a little link below too to a video I made about how to make a really good apology. I had to be taught. I made a video about it. Good friends appreciate it when you just say, hey, I'm sorry. What I said was really hurtful and I want to take it back. That kind of honesty and humility is something we all admire in other people. And if you can do it, your friend is much more likely to open their heart again to you. Research shows that people you hang out with have a bigger effect on how your life goes than just about anything else. They influence the choices you make. They influence the standards you set for yourself. They influence the other people that you're going to meet in the future. But the weird thing is, people hardly talk about this. We talk about romance and how to date, but did anyone ever teach you how to have friends? No, it's assumed that we'll just pick it up by osmosis or from our families. If this is something your parents didn't model for you, or they couldn't model for you because they were really limited or damaged in this area too, you are so not alone. Especially for people who grew up with trauma, learning to have friends and be a friend is so tricky. Maybe you struggle to have friends, or you have friends, but the relationship stays on the shallow end and you don't get close. Or you get close, but then your trauma symptoms can get the better of you and something happens to trigger you and the whole thing blows up. Big argument, little argument that you can't really recover from, or the friendship just crumbles. Has this happened to you? I'm guessing it's happened a number of times. If you grew up with abuse and neglect, there's a high probability that having friends is a part of life that gets hard for you sometimes. And this is a big reason why unhealed trauma can be so devastating to your life over time. You end up isolated. You don't have those people who love you and get you and who are there for you when you need them. And this is really important. Not having that is a big setback, and I'm sure that it's robbed you in some ways of the life that you deserve. But the good news is this can change and you can heal. And the path of your life can start getting better right now if you can develop some friendship skills and learn to form friendships with good people. Now, this is something I had to really work on in my life. My trauma symptoms kind of got worse over time in my early adulthood. And so good friends that I had were pulling away. And I didn't know what was wrong. Now I know. Now we all know. It's complex PTSD, and it has a common pattern of symptoms that once you know what they are, even if you haven't totally healed them yet, it can clarify what may have been going on and going wrong in your friendships, and what part of these problems is something you can change. So here's what I learned. First, it's so important that you pick the right people for friends, because if you're like a lot of people with childhood PTSD, you find that troubled people have this funny allure for you. What is it about them? It's a mystery. They feel so charmingly comfortable, so unthreatening, so much like home. And maybe you have a history of buddying up with the most troubled kid in the class, or somebody who turns out to have a drug problem, or people who are really not available to be good friends. So the first thing is to start identifying who would be the good, healthy people for you to hang out with. Now, we talk about this a lot in my dating and relationships course and in my connection course, because this broken picker problem is really common for people with childhood PTSD. But the way you choose friends can be just as rickety. Now, the key to get clear with yourself is to actually write down what characteristics are absolutely essential for you. So let's say it's that people are kind, right? They're honest. They reciprocate your interest in friendship. You don't have to know these people yet, but you're defining what the right people are like, how you will recognize them. And then you also spell out what characteristics you cannot have in friends. And this might be characteristics where you had a blind spot before and you know it brings your life down. So I used to have a blind spot for people who had serious drug addictions. First, I wouldn't see it. And then I would see it, but I'd be too afraid of loneliness to say anything or stop hanging out with them. And I had no business hanging out with serious addicts. I was never into drugs myself, but that's what I grew up with, and that's where I felt at home. And so I'd use kind of fuzzy reasoning to rationalize staying friends with serious addictions. And it would introduce all kinds of trouble into my life. Drama, shame, people stealing my stuff. I know, right? It didn't fit with the other parts of my life where I was fairly functional. And I had to make a decision that I could not have that in my life anymore. Not with the blind spot that I personally have and the way I couldn't seem to keep boundaries at the time. So you write down what your lines are, what characteristics are a big no way for people that you let into your life. Okay, so that helps keep certain people out. And as you may be fearing, it's true that setting boundaries about who can be in your life could introduce a period of loneliness. You end some friendships and the new people haven't arrived yet. You haven't found them yet. Now, I know finding good, healthy people is easier said than done when you had a crappy childhood. Sometimes trauma symptoms show up that make things harder for that too. Maybe you get emotionally intense and fall apart. Friends might stand by you at first, but part of falling apart is it makes a person very inwardly focused. And in the long run, this can push friends away too. Or worse, maybe your stress comes out as a tendency to criticize and blame your friends when you're feeling overwhelmed. So there's conflict. You're hurting feelings. They don't want to deal with that, so they pull away. Or maybe you're the one who pulls away. So these are common trauma-driven dynamics and reactions to ordinary stress that can happen in a friendship. And even if you're able to keep your feelings under control enough to not ruin everything in a big explosion, that kind of self-control can really limit the depth of a relationship. It can limit how much fun the friendship can be if you're just holding yourself together tightly all the time. There's not the deep connection and trust between you and your friend that would be needed for a friendship to last. And so over time, being too controlled will cause a friendship to fade too. And it's a sad and hard part of trauma healing that this part can be so hard to change, but you can change these dynamics by working on yourself. So one of the first things you can do to have great relationships is just pick good people and then work over time to be a good friend. When you want to hang out with somebody, I would suggest, if it's at all awkward, invite them to do something with you. So not just random hanging out, but an activity. With good friends, it's normal to get together without a plan or without an activity. And that's really good with somebody you're already close with, where there's no need to have a plan. But if you're just getting to know somebody, doing some activity can kind of take the focus off the interpersonal dynamics so much. You know, a little is good, but a lot can be overwhelming. Now, one of my favorite examples, I always say this, bowling, right? The bowling alley near me closed during the pandemic. I hate that. If you go to a movie with somebody, right, you can't talk. If you go to a restaurant, you have to talk the whole time. But if you go bowling, you can kind of talk, bowl. And if things get weird or you need a breather, you can just really focus on the bowling for a little while and then come back to the conversation. So doing things helps. The next thing is about being a good listener. Now, everybody knows this, but try this, okay? When you get together with your friend, spend 30 minutes just doing an experiment. Only listen to them. Don't talk about yourself, and instead focus on listening and responding to what they're saying about themselves. Now, I'm not saying do this forever, but just as an experiment and as practice, just listen to the other person and reflect on what they're saying and give them feedback. Now, it may feel really uncomfortable to not talk about yourself at all, right? Because what's normal, what people do often is you say, hey, this thing happened to me. And it's normal for somebody else to say, oh, that happens to you? Me too. One time, and then you tell a story about how it happened to you. So it's natural to relate information about yourself when someone tells you something about themselves. That's the way many of us think that we're being a good friend, and sometimes it is, but when it goes too far, it can make the other person feel interrupted and deflated about something they were trying to be heard about. So it's good to really, hear what someone's trying to say, to really hear it. So when they tell you about something that happened, you can go, wow, what was that like for you? And then what happened? Right? And, wow, that's weird. You listen to what they're saying and respond to what they're saying. Don't relate it to yourself. That's how you can get closer to a person. 30 minutes, just try not talking about yourself, okay? It will teach you a lot. So this one time, my husband and I went to a party where we didn't really know people, and we were kind of anxious about the party because we both would prefer to be at a party where we know somebody. So just as a strategy to make the evening fun, we decided to do the experiment, and we made a rule for the whole evening, just a secret rule. We didn't tell anybody we were doing it. For the whole party, we only listened and talked about what other people were saying. We never, ever talked about ourselves. And it was funny. We were so popular. We got invited by 2 other couples to have dinner sometimes. And honestly, that rarely happens, when we meet people. They didn't know anything about us, and here's the funny thing. They never asked a single thing about us, right? See, they weren't great listeners either, and it didn't feel great to never be asked, but it really raised my awareness about, wow, that is not what's going on in a conversation with a lot of people. Some are really great at it. So anyway, we never actually ended up having dinner with anybody, but it was a really good lesson for me that you can just listen, and you can actually learn a lot about people. It reminds me when I used to have this work that involved a lot of travel, and a bunch of us would travel to other cities and do a consulting job and then travel somewhere else. And a lot of times people got together and had wine at dinner. And at a certain phase of my life, I decided I just didn't want to drink alcohol anymore. And for 8 years, I didn't drink any alcohol. And it was so interesting because when you sit together and you don't drink alcohol with people who are just having some wine with dinner, they get very open about stuff. And I was just very aware of myself. And it was a little bit of a contact high to be around people who were having a glass or 2 of wine. So I felt relaxed. I felt like myself, but I wasn't accidentally self-disclosing a bunch of stuff, which is what, especially back at that time of my life, was likely to have happened. And the other thing I liked about it is that, if I would go to the ladies' room at 10 o'clock at night and go to the mirror to wash my hands, I'd look in the mirror and my face was still fresh. It wasn't all red with running mascara. It was a nice little thing. So, not drinking wine and doing a really good job of listening is a way to really show up with other people with all your faculties. And I'm not saying you have to be so perfect all the time that you're just with your faculties all the time. Sometimes you get to relax. But I am saying if you struggle to make friends, anything you can do to heighten your awareness of what the dynamic is and just pay attention to what your natural inclinations are, what's hard for you, what other people are like. I was really surprised. I thought that these other people at the party were people that we had to impress. But the fact that they never asked about us and talked about themselves, I don't know. It just wasn't that impressive. It was okay. It just wasn't that impressive though. So I learned a lot of people are not good listeners, but just about everyone is hungry to be listened to. So here's another thing to keep in mind, and it's another form of good listening, is don't give unsolicited advice. If somebody says, oh, I had a hard day yesterday, I had a headache all day, you don't have to jump in and tell them what you do about a headache and go, oh, you know what you have to do? They're not really telling you about the headache unless people specifically ask for advice. Hey, what would you do if you had a headache? It's just better to listen and hear what it is they really wanted you to hear, which is that they had a hard day. It was so hard they had a headache the whole time. And then you can say, wow, that sounds like a hard day. What did you do? That's how a friend listens. So similar to that, you can give them affirmation. You can give them a word of praise, recognizing something good about them, a compliment. People like to be appreciated more than you might think. And obviously, you shouldn't do it too much. At a certain point, it becomes manipulative of other people, and that's not good. But when you can give a sincere compliment, make it a clean compliment. Don't say, oh gosh, your blouse is so pretty. Mine is so ugly though, but I love yours. That's not a clean compliment. That's kind of like loaded, right? You're putting them on the spot to say something about your blouse. No, yours is very nice. A clean compliment is when you go, that shirt you're wearing just looks great. It's a really good color for you. That's it. And you just make it clean, nice, clean compliment. And people like it, and it boosts their spirits. They need encouragement, and they like it when their accomplishments and the good things about them are noticed. That's just a good friend thing to do, is to notice and encourage what is good in another person. Now, here's another good listening thing. When your friend has told you about a big thing they're expecting, maybe they're giving a speech at an event next week, or they have a final, or they tell you about something that was hard, like they recently had shoulder surgery, a good friend follows up on that. Maybe calls them a few days later and says, hey, I was just checking in. How'd the speech go? Or how's your shoulder doing today? If you think about it, people who do that for you, those are the people who you end up closest with. That's like showing up for people and actually paying attention, not just in the moment, in the conversation, but over time. That's what a good friend is, it's not just small talk. It's connection. It's a durable connection between you. That's what a good friend is. If you want to have a friend, you've got to be a friend. And if you want to have a good friend, you've got to be a good friend. Now, another thing is to be a believer in your friend. Everybody has self-doubt. And when we become friends with people, we'll begin to reveal what those doubts are. And they might be something like, well, I'm thinking about changing jobs, but I think I might be kidding myself that anyone would ever hire me. So you know what a good friend is? It's someone who sees your very best potential and believes in you and can express that to you and remind you of your strengths and why you are employable, and supports you in finding ways to make that happen. That's how to be a believer in your friend. And I think a lot of people, we tend to think that if we don't put somebody down, then we're not causing any harm. But actually, people need to have a witness that they're doing something right and that there's potential for them to do something even better. So good friends can believe in the best possible outcome and always encourage a friend toward that next step. A good friend also shows up for the hard stuff. And that means picking people up from the airport, visiting them in the hospital, helping them move their furniture, and sitting with them when they're grieving, when they've lost a loved one. I know that when there was a period in my life where I had a lot of tragedy, I really found out who my friends were. A lot of people who I thought were good friends, they disappeared. They didn't help. They didn't even call. Or they said, let me know if there's anything I can do, or I don't know what to say. You don't even know what you need when you're in that state. So when people say, if there's anything I can do, you'll notice nothing really follows up. And that's kind of baked into that comment of like, let me know if there's anything I can do. There are special people who know how to ask if you need help. They know what to say. They suggest a thing or two. They say, would it help if I picked up some groceries on my way over? And would it be okay if I wash these dishes right now? It was the people who did that for me, who took the time to come see me in the hospital, even though it was far away and so boring and creepy and hard to park. And they are the people who made a huge difference in my life right when I was the most depressed. And they encouraged me and took me for walks around the corridors. In the long run, those are the people who became the lifelong friends. It's a beautiful thing to do for other people. So you want to show up for the good times, the weddings, the parties, the celebrations, but you also want to show up for the hard stuff. And a good friend shows up for the good and the bad. You never want to talk behind your friend's back. That's important. I'm just going to say this. You don't really want to say anything bad about anyone who's not present, but especially your friends. Don't ever talk about them behind their back. I mean, even if you know for a fact they're never going to know, just on the off chance that the energy reaches them. You know, our nervous systems are connected and we can feel these things in each other. You know, if somebody says, "No, I'm not mad," you can feel when they're mad, right? We're connected. The people we love especially, you know, can feel that. So you don't want to talk about your friends behind their back. Have their back, protect their identity, protect who they are, protect their hearts. And finally, stay in touch with them. This is one of the terrible things about contemporary times, is that we think, well, I said hello on Instagram and I texted happy birthday or I stuck it on Facebook. But if you're not talking to people face to face, or at least on the telephone, it's really hard to sustain a close friendship. Messaging on social media, it's not nothing, but for those purposes, it just doesn't count. So whenever you can, go see people face to face. If you can't see them face to face, talk on the phone or video chat. If you can't talk on the phone, send an email. And if you can't send an email, send a text. And if you can't do that, okay, fine, talk to them on social media. If I do all those things for people, they don't do it for me, then go back to the beginning of the video where I said the first thing is how you choose people. It's all about how you choose your friends. So these are some of the ways that you can be a better friend. If you didn't get cared for properly when you were little, it's hard to read other people when they actually like you and there's potential for real friendship versus when they're just being friendly, but the connection between you isn't going to stand the test of time. And what also complicates making new friends is that so many of us need a friend so badly that there's pressure on the relationship from the get-go. Old childhood wounds sneak out and make it feel urgent that you connect, that the friendship happen. And when it doesn't, it can feel devastating. So how do you know when someone is really interested in friendship? And how can you get to know them in a way that gradually lets you observe what they're actually like? Do they get you, or is it superficial? Do they belong in your life, or are they just using you as a time filler or as a stepping stone to some other friends? And when you feel weird and bad with them, is it just you, or is it not a fit? My letter today is from a woman I'll call Mira, and she writes, "Dear Fairy, I recently had a situation with 2 newer friendships." Got the fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things that stand out to me in this letter I want to come back to, but let's do a whole read on Mira's letter and see if I can help. All right. She says, of these 2 newer friendships, one I hung out with one-on-one, and she seemed very interested in me, and we could have deeper conversations. She kept asking questions about things I was doing. I thought it was out of conversation, but soon I could see she was kind of copying me. I started teaching a yoga class at a popular spot, and she asked me about it and attended my class and said she wanted to make it part of her routine. We're both new to the city, and she hadn't made any other friends yet. She was telling me she wanted to lead some kind of discussions at her house or somewhere because she's a, quote, life coach. Well, before I know it, she's having them at the same place I am and used the connection with me to get it. In her mini Facebook vlogs, I noticed she mentioned once, if you don't want to do yoga like everybody else, you don't have to. And it seemed like a jab at me because that's what I was doing, but I let it go. Then I introduced her to some new friends, and she seemed eager to make friends. I noticed she kept asking me to invite other people. I then started working outdoors with a newer friend and mentioned it to this girl, and she immediately jumped on it. She's not even a morning person, and the workouts are super early and far for her, so it was strange that she would join. Then I saw she'd just focus her attention on this other friend, almost as if I wasn't there. I was really annoyed. She'd also post in our group chat asking to go to events on days that I was teaching my class, which felt weird. Then as soon as she had something else to do, she didn't come to my class. She didn't have to, but why say you will come? Then she invited everyone I introduced her to dinner, which felt weird. No one was there that I hadn't introduced her to. I heard this term friend poaching, and this is what I think she was doing. Anyway, I didn't want to, but I ended up inviting her to a weekend getaway because I felt she'd feel left out. This other girl and I had planned it. She jumped on that too, even though it was last minute. The whole time it seemed like she just focused her attention on getting close to the other girl, and I felt left out. I admit I often do, which could be part of my PTSD, but there I was feeling a competition vibe from this girl. I had a horrible time and even said at one point where they did something without me and they apologized, but still the same vibe was there. I felt left out and I didn't interact much, which was a CPTSD response, but it was too much for me to deal with. I was so dysregulated. After the trip, I stopped going to the workouts I started with the other girl, and the needy one posted pictures of them working out and how she is the best workout buddy. She's also posting constantly on Facebook and making this image of how close she is to the other girl, but she barely knows her. It's very off-putting to me, but now I'm the odd one out. It strikes me as weird and needy behavior, and she's a life coach. I also got her a client before I knew she was like this, but when sharing it with others, she didn't credit me. Did I totally misread this person? How do I know when my CPTSD is triggered and when to trust my judgment? How do I assess good friends and develop good friendships? I want to have a better friendship, but find them tough. It's hard to trust, and I find I'm often too open and then have to close up because I see they aren't that good. I'm constantly second-guessing myself and my perception. I'd love your perspective. Thank you. Okay, Mira. You know, I love this letter because your dilemma is like a perfect dilemma. You could do one reading of your situation and you're being ridiculous. You know, she's just making friends. What's the big deal? She's trying to build her yoga practice. There's this other read on it that I can see very well also because I've had this happen to me too. And I think other people thought I was being unreasonable, but it went on for years and I felt really ripped off. I felt that somebody had really used my friendships and social connections and social gatherings and things to develop their own thing, and then never acknowledged me, befriended me, included me. And after a while, it was sort of a hopeless mess, and it started to taint my feelings towards other people. I'll tell you how I resolved that, how I became happy and free of that whole thing in a minute, but let's go through. So you were saying this person was kind of copying you. Okay. Yeah, you could think, you know, okay, let me put on the hat where I'm like, Mira, you're being crazy. This is nothing. Copying you. They just have things in common. And she wanted to lead discussions, and then she used the place that she found out that where you were teaching already. Okay, well, it is hard to find a good venue, and she liked that venue, so she thought she'd do that. And then in her video, she said, if you don't want to do yoga like other people, you don't have to. Well, what could be more common sense than that? Why did you take it personally? Why did you think it was you? Now, again, Mira, I'm just being the voice of like, this is silly. Why are you being so petty? Because I do understand the other side. So then you introduced her to some friends, and because she really wanted to meet friends, she kept asking you to invite other people. Well, how friendly, you know? What a good idea. Maybe she's a social catalyst. She gets somebody like you to sort of participate and create more social gatherings, and everybody needs that, right? People are so lonely that we've been isolated for a long time. So then you noticed that a new friend was going to her thing, and it was odd because this other friend normally wouldn't go to an early morning thing, and it was far away. And many things like that. Your friend stopped coming to your class anytime she had something better to do. But hey, Mira, right? I mean, she has a life. What do you care whether she comes? And then you heard the term friend poaching. Well, you don't own people, do you? Anyway, you say, you invited her to a weekend getaway because you didn't want her to feel left out. You wanted to leave her out, right? But you didn't want her to feel left out. That's so kind of you. And another girl and you had planned it, and she came, and the whole time she just seemed like she was trying to get to know the other girl. And it was your friend, and somehow you felt like your alliance was getting ripped apart. Well, come on, didn't you want people to get together? Then these two friends start showing up on Facebook, how buddy-buddy they are. And you couldn't believe it because, you know, this person is a life coach, and life coaches are supposed to be better than that. But I'll tell you a secret about life coaches. And I guess technically I'm one. I rarely coach anymore. But the secret is everybody's just a person. Even licensed therapists are just people everybody's bound by common ethics, and people with a license are bound by legally binding ethics, but everybody's capable of being a jerk. We've experienced that, right? So then before you knew that she was weird and something was off, You referred a client and she didn't credit you. Well, I don't even know if that's common. Wouldn't that be a violation of privacy for a client? I don't know. Crediting you. So there's me, Mira, just being the voice that you undoubtedly have in part of your head, just going, I'm being silly. Why don't I just get over myself? Here's what I think. The whole thing just feels bad. You made a friend, and time again, it didn't feel good. You felt this weird feeling that you were sort of, she was shoving past you to get to your friends out of some vision she wanted to have clients, friends, a life. So I would just say, because her line of business is stuff like yoga and coaching or, whatever everybody does, it is important to network with people. And some people, they network at the expense of the very real organic relationships through which that sort of networking happens. If she left you feeling weird and bad about the interaction, she's not a very good networker. And I would say that tendency is likely to leave her clients feeling bad down the road, that she has an insensitivity or a tone deafness to how you're supposed to act around that. She's motivated by her own, agenda. And so I don't knock people having their own agenda. The hard part, and I say this as somebody like, I have my own business too, and my business depends very much on relationships with people. It never works to treat people badly along the way. Sometimes I have to set boundaries against people who are abusive or, dishonest. Sometimes, rarely, mostly, even when I realize that a working relationship or a friendship can't work for me, there's no reason to slam the door on the way out. Just being kind, leaving things on good terms is always a good idea. So I'm really sorry this happened to you. I think you wouldn't be watching my channel if you didn't have a background of trauma, and trauma just does this. It makes it hard to read other people. So I'm just here to give you a reality check. If it feels bad to you, it feels bad to you. And I think the one way that we can get in trouble when we're trying to draw a boundary against this feeling that we get from people, against people who treat us in a way that leaves a bad taste, just that leaves a stink in the air, right? It just doesn't feel good. You can't always put your finger on it, but that's how it feels, is go ahead and step back, and you don't have to make a pronouncement to her how terrible she is. Because technically, when I read the other side of the letter, technically she's done nothing wrong. It's just that you're not interested anymore. It doesn't feel good. So you literally don't have to tell her, your criticisms of her. You can just stop calling her and fade out from the interactions. And I know some people in the comments will be like, no, let her have it and tell her. And that's always an option too. Sometimes in healing, if you've never had the opportunity to be straight with somebody about how you feel, it can feel good to do it. I also think if she asks you, if she's like, why don't you ever call me anymore? What's going on? But the greatest thing you can do is when and if you do decide to talk about what happened with her and why you pulled away and didn't feel good about it, you can do it without resentment or fear about what's happening, and it will come out very powerfully and clearly in a way that possibly she could hear. And how you get to that point is by taking the resentful and fearful thoughts into a practice where you can keep rinsing them off. What's left is your clear and honest communication, not a bunch of leftover baggage from what happened in childhood. And once I had this friend and, my parents used to invalidate me. All that stuff is more than anybody can possibly take responsibility for. So it clutters up their ability to hear what it is you would prefer they do take responsibility for, which they usually don't. I'm just giving you a heads up. You can tell her how you feel. She doesn't sound like somebody who would be open to that, but you would be doing her a service if gently, kindly, without a bunch of other issues kind of mixed in there, you could just tell her what it was. But if she doesn't ask, I wouldn't do it. Most people really can't. They're not in a place where they can hear that. And hearing criticisms of them like that when they're not actually asking for it can trigger backlash. And then they say things to hurt you. Then you're dysregulated for 3 days. And who does that serve? So in short, I'm saying you have choices about how you want to deal with this. But stay with yourself. Stand by yourself. Honor the gut feeling you have that she doesn't care about you. And she cares about her. And I don't mean to paint her as a bad person. She just doesn't have that capacity. That's not where she's coming from. And you can just step away from such people. You don't even have to condemn them, smear them, anything like that. Just step away, save your emotional energy for the really cool people who do show up in your life, and then gradually become friends. I think becoming friends with people, if this type of thing has happened to you, it's very similar to what I recommend in a dating situation, which is go slowly, have some coffee, talk about things, let information come to you about who they are, what they're like. Notice, do they get in touch again later, or do you always have to do the calling? Or do they hound you? Do they, hunt you down? Are they always saying, hey, can you get more friends at the party? So you get to pay attention and you get to keep doing a gut check. How do you feel about it? Now, if you're using a tool like the daily practice, where you're sort of facing your emotional reaction to things a couple times a day and just kind of processing it, letting it go downstream, you will learn so much about the nature of reality. You'll start to be able to perceive, perhaps for the first time in your life, what's really happening between you and another person. I can't recommend it enough.